So, thank you all for being here today. My name is Haley Kretschmer. I use she, her pronouns, and I serve as an assistant director on the student organizations and activities team. So, our office is housed on the third floor of Norris Center in the Source, and I am accompanied by Joe. I'll let him introduce himself.
Good afternoon, everyone. Joe Littell here, Associate Director with Student Orgs and Activities, he and him pronouns, and excited to connect with you all on a topic a lot of us are familiar with, know a little bit about, and we're excited to frame this for a learning environment for advisors as it pertains to student organizations.
Today, we have a lot of things that we'd like to get through, and we're going to do our best to fit everything in this 1 hour session. First, we're going to talk about some learning outcomes that we hope you have as a result of attending. We're going to talk about one specific book that we really used to catalyze this experience of putting this presentation together and the framework that we'll be using. We're going to talk about why canceling occurs, give some examples that are relevant to the student org experience. And then we're going to focus on you all as advisors, proactive tips that you can use, reflection questions that you can be thinking about, suggestions for how you can take action moving forward in supporting your students. We're going to go over some resources for you. If there is time, which hopefully there will be, we'll have some room for discussion where we'll put you in some breakout rooms towards the end, and we'll wrap up with some final announcements. So in terms of learning outcomes, there are 3 specific learning outcomes we hope you will achieve by attending. Our first is we hope that you'll be able to articulate common reasons for why and how students tend to cancel one another. We hope that you'll be able to facilitate dialogue with students canceling, as well as being concerned about being canceled. We recognize there are 2 sides of the coin here. And we also hope that you will know where to turn for resources and support should you be in the situation where a student comes to you with a situation pertaining to cancel culture.
Great. So before we get started, I know we might come into this learning session with different perspectives of what comes to mind when we hear the phrase cancel culture. A couple things I'd like to share is there's absolutely a need for accountability with actions. And this is often kind of like a dichotomy that gets framed when cancel culture gets talked about. Is the reaction to maybe someone's words or behavior just holding someone accountable or taking them to task? And is it basically fair or unfair? Or is it just, as the author of the book, who we're going to discuss in depth, frames it, is it more of kind of like a feeding frenzy with an analogy to a shark that detects blood in the water and then lots of sharks swim in that direction, whether they empathize with someone, whether they have a similar experience, or for another reason entirely. But even though this is a topic that is certainly trending among student affairs professional organizations with advisors and students and all sorts of folks wanting to learn more about this phenomenon, cancel culture or call out culture has existed long before the culture that we're seeing right now. I know Psychology Today is a publication that our Dean of Students and Nicole Eggleston Watson referred to when they did a little bit of research on this topic, to find that shaming, public humiliation for things has been a part of human history for a long, long time. But what we're seeing now is a bit of acceleration in that, mainly in the wake of COVID-19. That's what the author talks a bit about, who we'll discuss in depth in this session. And pictured here, you see Tarana Burke, who is often credited as one of the original founders of the Me Too movement, and is the one who said Me Too. You can read all about that story online from back in 2006. And it's often something that comes to mind when we think of cancel culture, is this method of not finding justice or peace in what is currently available to try and, right wrong, so to speak. And so looking at another way to try and right a wrong through a call out or cancel.
So the book to which Joe has been referring is called We Will Not Cancel Us and Other Dreams of Transformative Justice. And this is by Adrienne Maree Brown. And it is a very short book. It's only around 88 pages, but it is rich with ideas and perspectives pertaining to cancel culture. This is a book that was originally recommended to Joe and myself by Kelly Schaefer, and we both had the opportunity to read it. And so we want to use this book as a guideline for our presentation here and share some of the thoughts from Adrienne Maree Brown in terms of how you can be part of the solution and support your students. This book particularly, hence the title, is very much focused around transformative justice. So not only are we thinking about what cancel culture has done to our society and how it has implications on our campus, but we're thinking about ways to have and pursue justice in a way that is transformative and has learning behind it. And your role as an advisor is to aid students in that process. There is one quote at the beginning of the book that really stood out to me because it creates an analogy between cancel culture and a mushroom. So I'm going to read it aloud for us here. We won't end the systematic pattern of harm by isolating and picking off individuals, just as we can't limit the communicative power of mycelium by plucking a single mushroom from the dirt. We need to flood the entire system with life-affirming principles and practices to clear the channels between us of the toxicity of supremacy, to heal from the harms of a legacy of devaluing some lives and needs in order to indulge others. This is all to say, we see that students believe that canceling is the perfect solution. We'll just remove that one person or that group of people. Okay, they're out of our hands, they're off of our minds, all will be good. And really what this quote shares is that by canceling someone, there's not a whole lot that's being done, especially pertaining to something like the student org community that isn't necessarily quite as large as a celebrity or something that the whole world will know about. So it's going to be our job to help communicating with them other ways that they can still hold someone accountable and talk about the harm and the implications of that harm without necessarily just plucking them and putting them aside, knowing that, there are so many mushrooms on this campus in the way that they all intertwine and affect one another.
So again, with differing levels of familiarity with cancel culture or call outs, why do we see canceling occur on our campus or more specifically in the student org community? In some cases, there is not an opportunity to communicate or a desire to communicate about hurt or harm that involves the person alleged of that harm, whether that's a power dynamic, whether that's a feeling of safety. And it's also sometimes a trust in some of the systems that the institution has in place as well, which leads into the second point, just dissatisfaction with, I went the route that I was instructed to go and I wasn't satisfied with the outcome. And so, I feel that this is a better means to kind of seek what I'm seeking. And we've also, it's a habit of kind of seeing others do it too, right? So whether it's through social media posts, especially anonymous posts about others, or just the, pre-social media era of call outs through just gossip and rumors and tight-knit communities. And the author points out how this was really, really catalyzed during the pandemic, especially in the digital space where a lot of folks were isolated. They had more time with their thoughts. There was a lot more reflection on, maybe processing some prior harms that had not been resolved, as well as some of the above items in this list as potential outlets to try and resolve that. But we also see sometimes there's a fear of being canceled yourself, right? So if there's something going on in a student org, it feels like people are starting to take sides. Sometimes students feel a need to, with urgency, get their narrative out there first of what happened and try and gain allies in, an adversarial relationship. And other times it's to gain back power. We know there's power dynamics in our student orgs, with folks who maybe lead specific committees or have more responsibility or more connections. And sometimes there's students that feel they were unjustly treated if they were asked to leave an organization. And so it's kind of a way to get back at them sometimes. And it might not be appropriate to go through a traditional campus outlet to seek that recourse. But it doesn't necessarily mean that that's the only way that the student can resolve the issue. Oftentimes it's, someone's in pain, they've been harmed, and they want whoever's alleged to have committed that harm to also feel what they're feeling too. And the author also writes about, in some cases, feelings of just wanting to have that person kind of cease to be in their mind, right? So getting this out there can feel really good for an individual, and in some ways kind of wrap up maybe a period of their life that was painful or harmful. So I'm going to offer some examples. All of the identifying data, of course, is not included in this, but hopefully some of this resonates with you if you're still feeling like you're not quite sure how this might apply in our student orgs. So this first example is someone that started an organization as a first-year student and stayed involved as a leader in it until their fourth year, started to feel uneasy about the role someone played who wasn't even a student here based on some private interactions they had with them. And to their surprise, other members of the organization felt that the group relied on this individual for their resources and kind of chose sides and saw a little bit of a mutiny of trying to oust the co-founder for basically not aligning themselves with this person that everyone else had. And there's questions around whether this was under the influence of the non-student. So think of a student that's, really aligning their whole Northwestern experience with this organization that, they submitted the proposal for, they took all the required steps to get it off the ground. They developed it to grow membership and achieve a lot of things. And it's supposed to be maybe not like a victory lap, but kind of like a long farewell, ends up having this really ill feeling towards the end, which is really a shame, and feeling like, they're actually no longer going to be connected to the org that they invested so much in. Another example, an org's leaders were upset that a member had released some confidential information that they were privy to related to an upcoming event. And, when it comes to contracts with speakers or entertainers, obviously there's situations where there's people in the group who kind of need to know based on their role if they're going to be advertising or promoting it before that information is out to the public. And in this particular case, an individual just basically told everyone they knew what they weren't supposed to, jeopardizing the whole event even happening. Because in that case, a contracted speaker, other visitor to campus reserves the right to not only cancel their appearance if they're not pleased that it's announced before a contract's been signed, but the university is also potentially on the hook for paying them for violating the terms. So in this case, it probably isn't a surprise that this was like an immediate expulsion from the group for this particular person. But kind of above and beyond that, the leaders also felt like they didn't even want this student to have the opportunity to attend this event as kind of like a punishment for their actions. And as a result, that got out that this was happening. And every time the group published something about their upcoming event, whether it was related to the speaker, entertainer that was involved or not, the comments were just flooded with people bad-mouthing the leaders of the organization, people bad-mouthing this individual. And it just really steered the conversation away from what it typically is in these announcements. The last example is campus media live streamed a debate among candidates for competing for a role in student government. And rather than focusing on what they were actually talking about or commenting on, their opinions on things, it turned really ugly. In social media as well as in the live stream, focusing on the physical appearance and ethnicity of one of the particular candidates. For those of you who are not familiar or may have been familiar several years ago, Yik Yak is unfortunately back. It's very toxic on campus. We know that there's some students that avoid it at all costs, but it is also a platform where people are anonymously free to just kind of spout whatever they want for the most part. And so that among, all of the social media outlets that our students are using is another place where we see for students to kind of cancel each other or, lead to these feelings of ostracization and a lot of harm being done.
There are 3 more salient quotes which we felt really applied to the current context of our student org community. And I'll read them aloud because I know that it's hard to listen to what I'm saying and read the quote at the same time. The first is knee-jerk callouts say, those who cause harm or mess up or disagree with us cannot change and cannot belong. They must be eradicated. The bad things in the world cannot change. We must disappear the bad until there is only good left. This goes back to what we were saying earlier about how this, in the minds of a lot of students, is the main reason why canceling happens is, oh, we're just going to pick them up and put them out. And that's the end of that, when we know in reality that's not how that works. The next quote is, when the response to mistakes, failures, and misunderstandings is emotional, psychological, economic, and physical punishment, we breed a culture of fear, secrecy, and isolation. This is real. A lot of cancel culture is rooted in pure fear on both sides of the bargain. And we really believe that cancel culture will very much affect a student's experience at Northwestern, again, on both sides. It's something that's very personal. It can feel like an attack if you are being the one canceled. If something happened to you, of course, it's going to certainly cause some physical arousal in you. So I find this to be incredibly true. Again, all rooted in fear and the lack of ability to communicate properly with one another, which then goes into this last one. Our movements are in danger because we don't know how to handle conflict or how to move towards accountability in satisfying and collective ways. It feels like we don't know how to belong to each other, to something big and collective and decolonizing. So that's where we all come in. We are there to help them learn. We are there to help them grow. And we want to make sure that students know that they have the skills and the tools that they need to address the conflict. But like Joe was mentioning, especially in the height of the pandemic and what the pandemic has really produced for us, is this sense of fear or it being easier to cancel people behind the screens. So that's what we're really hoping to continue to work towards dismantling.
So our hope for our audience today is, as always, pretty much with every session, we're going to offer a lot of the work happens before we're in the midst of it, right? So strengthening relationships with student contacts. Relevant for this particular discussion, for those of you that are on Instagram or other social media platforms, ask yourself, do you follow the student orgs that you advise, just to get a sense of what's going on, if there's engagement, if there's comments, so you can identify some of those things proactively if they do happen. When you are connecting with students, it's similarly kind of before you're in the midst of it, ask them to identify any troubling dynamics or relationships among their board, among new members. Our hope is that advisors can be someone that the students trust to bring up some of these topics. And it's always helpful to ask too, are you telling me because, you need to vent, or you just want to get this out there? Are you expecting me to help you problem solve? Are you looking for recommendations, or are you just telling me because you want me to know? This is something that can kind of foreshadow what might be looming, especially as we head into a time of year where a lot of our organizations are going to be transitioning roles. In some cases, there might even be a competition for roles. And that's where we can sometimes see that conflict. It's always helpful to go back to the core values and the mission of the org too. When it comes to disagreements in orgs, I always ask, what have they consulted their constitution for trying to resolve some of these things? And it's not as though constitutions are exhaustive to solve everything, but I think it can also ground them a bit in something that ought to be a shared document for members of the organization. When it comes to interpersonal issues, sometimes the mission or values of the org can come into play in that. So if students feel like they need assistance on how to talk about some of these things with individuals that might be having problems with one another in the organization, that's one place to operate from without perhaps showing any, explicit bias towards one side or the other, so to speak. I also recommend just explicitly bringing up this topic with your students. Are they seeing this themselves in their student organization or in any other networks or communities on campus? Is this something they're afraid of that could happen to them? Are they nervous about being put into a leadership role where they are going to be asked to, make a statement on something or take a side on something, and they're uncomfortable with that? So again, we all bring experience from our lives in connecting with students on how to discuss this topic with them. And lastly, I think it's important to acknowledge, at least as an advisor, when I've been involved in some of these cases, I often do get the one side from the student I know a whole lot better, but there can be value in reaching out to that other student who is on the other side. We're responsible for caring for all of our students, offering them all resources. It's still important to acknowledge with everyone when harm has been done, that harm has been done, and to seek ways to restore justice. And that said, sometimes students don't want to participate in that process, but I think just the gesture of reaching out to students can really go a long way. Or at least I've seen that in the last couple of years in dealing with some groups where this is going on, that I either directly advise or have just reached out to our department for assistance in navigating it.
Adrienne Marie Brown basically alluded to a list of questions in no particular order that were helpful for you to think through in terms of how you can play a role in helping someone who may be navigating this type of situation. And I noted a few questions that I believe are most relevant to this conflict. First, it can always be helpful to reflect upon or ask your students, have there been any private efforts for accountability or conflict resolution? So trying to get at what has already been done, if anything. Again, sometimes efforts for accountability take folks in a different direction than maybe what you and I believe can help a student. So this is something to get to the bottom of. Another question is the student being adequately supported? So if it is someone who's coming forward to you saying, hey, this thing happened to me, you want to be putting your attention on that student to make sure that they're cared for, that they have the resources that they need in the moment, and of course, connecting them with anyone on campus who you think could support them as well, which we'll be getting to a little bit later in this presentation. And for the person being canceled too, if you know that student, it is good to check in on that student because, of course, like Joe mentioned, there are two sides to every story, and there can be a lot of harm felt from the other party as well. Another question is, has the accused individual or group acknowledged what they've done, or are they saying something different happened, or even that nothing happened? Again, this goes back to two sides to every story. If you are acting upon what you learn from just one student or one individual, then that will be really challenging when you choose to take action very quickly And then you learn that maybe there are some other sides to the story that you weren't first aware of. I threw a question in that I think is relevant of how does power and privilege play a role in the situation? So thinking about, is the person who is being canceled, do they have a high leadership role in the org? Is the person wanting to cancel, do they have a lot of positional power? Because that's also going to affect how people may stand by certain students, or student organizations in this process. And the last one, which I underlined because of how important I believe it is there enough time between the accusation and the call for consequences to make sure we know what's going on and what's possible? Timing is everything. It can feel very pressing in a moment when someone comes forward and tells you something that you need to act in that specific moment. And while for certain extremely serious examples, that is a time where you need to act in the moment. A lot of situations that we have seen in our office are more due to interpersonal conflict or things that we can kind of get a little bit closer to a solution with just through advising, through counseling, and through specific language. So be reflecting upon that as a student comes forward to you to share something of, wait a minute, let's put a pause on this. There's some more information that needs to be gathered before I can know how to best support you. And that will make them feel validated too, for whatever situation it is.
I was going to add one of the things we did to prepare for this was connect with Nicole Eggleston Watkins, who had presented on this topic with Mona Dugo last spring. And she said, a great piece of advice she gave is that, when students come to an advisor, and this might be the first time the advisor's hearing about a situation that's interpersonal. Obviously, there's a lot of emotion tied to it, and the story can be very complicated or detailed. Sometimes it's really helpful just to acknowledge when, they've kind of said what they want you to hear, to just acknowledge that it's a lot, and, not immediately respond with more questions or try and offer solutions without all the information, but to just kind of sit with that, it is complicated, and it can be really tough to navigate. And sometimes, they've seen students kind of also reflect more than they had before, just to take the time to acknowledge that before identifying some possible courses of action.
We've put together some tangible language for you to use in addition to the last slide that can be helpful for you if you're approached with this type of situation. First, we want you to be approaching the conversation with empathy. So like Joe was mentioning, taking that pause, thanking them for coming to you, thanking them for trusting you. Because for some students, you might be the first person who they consider telling about whatever happened. So of course, believing them and knowing that you should be taking them seriously and offering coping strategies that you have for them in that moment, focusing on comforting that student versus the other parties involved. That can be another step or a next step, but not specifically in that moment is what they want to be focusing on. Seeking understanding is really important, asking clarifying questions, asking what the student needs, short-term and long-term, trying to gather a better understanding of what happened. If there are things on social media, any sort of receipt, for lack of better words, that you can receive will be helpful for you in understanding the greater context as well. And then can help you in the future should you be in a place where you are bringing folks together or you are having a larger conversation with students. This is something that I learned specifically from Joe. He role models this really well, is asking the student, what is your ideal outcome of the situation? This is really powerful because my initial thought, let's say a student is kind of exiled or kicked out of an org, that their initial outcome is they want to get back in the org. But upon deeper reflection, that's actually normally not what the student wants. They don't want to go back to an org where they already feel socially isolated and like people don't like them. They might want something totally different. They might not necessarily want another route other than just to get it off their chest to someone in SOA or their advisor that this happened and to have it on someone's radar. So by asking them basically why, what are you hoping to get out of this? Why are you coming to me? I'm here to support you. That's going to be very helpful for you moving forward. There are three main questions that Brown mentioned in her text towards the end that are always important to ask in these situations. It goes back to the why and listening to the why as a framework. I find that when it is time for you to help a student, always asking questions can be helpful for them to process their own thoughts and feelings. So that's something that I have learned. Asking yourself and having the student ask themselves, what can I learn from this? Again, a lot of messy situations going on here that have a lot of lessons embedded. And even if one of the lessons is, I learned that when something happens, I can or should go to my advisor, is a beautiful lesson that they'll take away from this as you build rapport with your students and help them navigate these situations. And the last is, how can my real-time actions contribute to transforming the situation versus making it worse? So really helping the student and yourself critically think about, are my next steps going to actually help the situation? Are they going to benefit people? And again, there is this mentality that cancel culture is ultimately what does create benefit. But it really doesn't get to the root of the issue most often. So thinking before acting about the next step that you take, no matter what it is this going to be something that truly benefits the person coming forward to me? Is it going to be something that gives justice to the situation? And of course, depending upon how serious the situation is, that's going to look different. And Joe and I are here to help you navigate that. Hopefully it won't come down to really serious situations for you. Again, I think the things we find most often are due to interpersonal conflicts or previous conflicts between people that happen to show up at Northwestern. But you want to be transforming the situation, not creating more holes. And I did think it was necessary to note that as an advisor, it is your responsibility that when someone comes forward to you about something that you treat it seriously. That doesn't necessarily mean, you need to be the person to rally everyone together. That doesn't necessarily mean that you need to, have daily follow-ups with a person until they graduate. It's going to look different for everything. Obviously, if it is something pertaining to sexual harassment or something of that type of serious nature, you are a mandated reporter. That's when that immediately moves on. But if it is something pertaining to interpersonal conflict or kind of in that like lower mid-range, it is your responsibility just to kind of keep tabs on what's happening and making sure that students know that you're available to them in any capacity to help. And that kind of goes back to even the proactive slide that we were talking about earlier of the more you can build rapport with students, the more you can show that you're a trusting person on this campus, they're going to, by nature, keep you in the loop with what's happening. And hopefully you can catch things before there are bigger falls in the future.
I'll also add that sometimes what's best for the student and their well-being isn't always in alignment with how can I put this? What feels right? So for example, there was a student that came to me from an org and they're having all sorts of issues with other members of their org. And I had gotten to know them well. I trusted them. I believed their account. And I feel like they were treated really poorly by their peers. And I feel like where the conversation really shifted is we were just kind of in the messiness of it all. And I said, I know you've probably thought about it, but I feel like we just need to process the fact that one outcome of this for your own well-being is to actually move on from this organization. And I said, I'm not saying that that's the right thing. And I know it doesn't feel right. But in some cases that is going to be what's best. And it can be really hard for students to kind of see that, especially when they feel like they've been treated poorly, they want something done. They feel like people are getting away with things that they shouldn't, and they're the ones that have invested and put in the work. And in other words, they should be the one that, kind of comes out on top of all this. But sometimes I think coming from an advisor, just to hear that as an option, and then discussing it, whether that's in the moment or coming back to it later, can be really helpful. And it's hard to say, but there are times when we really do want, we always want what's best for the student. And sometimes when we hear some of these scenarios or different cases of, just kind of like a toxic culture in an organization, we can compartmentalize a little bit and say, we're still going to deal with that, but maybe for now, just so you can make the best decision for yourself, that decision might be just to kind of remove yourself from this environment at the moment. So it's never an easy conversation to have, but I found it really helpful in the practice in the last year. We do want to share some further resources with you all. Some of these might just be reminders, but there are a number of offices that can assist with a variety of different situations when it comes to these interpersonal dynamics that can lead to call outs or cancels on campus. Office of Community Standards, formerly known as Office of Student Conduct. They handle all issues related to the Northwestern Student Code of Conduct as found in the handbook. So anything related to student behaviors, words, other actions, anything that's going to be in violation of that ought to directly be handled by OCS rather than the advisor. They have folks that are trained in these things to, resolve these issues, whether it's, whether the student org is a party itself, or it's just among individuals, or it's an individual in a campus policy. Office of Equity specializes in specific issues that involve discrimination, harassment, or sexual misconduct. Counseling and Psych Services, or CAPS, we want to remind folks that anyone can offer information and refer students to CAPS. If it's been a while since you've taken a look at their website, just to know what type of services they provide and who they serve, especially for those of us on the call that might also work with graduate students or professional students or folks in the Chicago campus community, it can be really helpful as an advisor to know what they provide. And of course, undergraduate students are entitled to a bit of free therapy and support as well. So if cost is a barrier, CAPS is able to work with students. And then lastly, SOA team, me, Haley, Director Tracy, and Parker, we're here to help as advisors. Might not be 100% on all the campus policies or student org requirements. When it comes to registered student orgs in the undergraduate experience, that's us. And we can also be a thought partner with advisors in navigating some of these situations as well. There are some cases where, the advisors refer students to us directly, or the students come to us directly. But our hope is that we have advisors who represent so many different departments across the institution that they can all have this knowledge and, think through some cases of how they might be able to support students through one of these periods.
I also think something quickly to mention with that too, in terms of the Office of Community Standards and the Office of Equity, is if you do hear something in talking with the students that genuinely is out of line with our community standards, a policy is violated of something of that nature, then absolutely, you want to report that. I know of at least one cancel culture situation here where students were kind of like, I heard this student did this thing. So I just don't want them there, and kind of having to talk through, well, if they're not through the process and if nothing has been reported, technically that student can be at that free public open event to the Northwestern community. But if you know of something specific about that student that happened to you or one of your friends, you do want to go ahead and report that. So we love these offices as thought partners, and we work with them closely, and we're happy to connect you in any way we can. So in that case, I'm going to pop some questions in the chat here, and I'm going to open out a breakout room. This is really a time for you to have some thought partners as you are kind of processing some of the things that we've discussed here. So you do not need to answer all of these questions. You do not need to answer any of these questions, but we popped them in the chat here just as a foundation or baseline for you. I'm going to open the room for probably 7 minutes or so, maybe 8 minutes. And then once it comes time to that, we will come back and we can have some share outs before it is time to wrap up. And Saeed, I think you had your hand raised here.
Yeah, really appreciate it and appreciate this discussion. One thing I wanted to add for y'all's reference is that we don't advertise it formally, although we're going to start advertising it more formally. But over the last, it's really been since I started at Northwestern 4.5 years, that CARE, it used to be that CARE and Equity would partner with each other on, student concerns related to this. I mean, obviously more related to violence prevention and harassment, given what CARE and Equity both do. But we used to have joint meetings where I would sit with maybe Kate, it used to be Kate and Equity, to talk to students about issues and concerns as they come up around group dynamics, cancels, stuff that comes up, accusations of harm, and help our students navigate that. Since Kate has left, I've certainly taken that over much more with Caitlin, Kenan, my colleague over in CARE, who's in manages support services for our students. So all that to say is that it might even be helpful just to let your students know that CARE does provide those meetings for student leaders, not even just student leaders, but student members. Sometimes we meet with groups of members together, and what could be helpful to your students is that we are confidential. So when students come to talk to us about accusations and harm and stuff, they don't have to really navigate the responsible employee stuff with us in the same way. So that could be a tremendous benefit. So I'll go ahead and put that, our emails in the chat, but we, for instance, helped FSL develop a protocol for their students to where when student leaders, have some issues internally, then they can reach out to us as well with our protocol. So just wanted to mention that for folks as a resource.
Thank you so much for highlighting that. And also it's great to know, there are full-time professionals on this campus who are here to help in these very specific contexts. So with that, thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and open the rooms here. I'm putting it for 7 minutes with that 60-second buffer to get you back here by the 8-minute mark, and we will see you then.
Okay, I'm seeing activity in both rooms. That's good.
Yeah,
And I almost wonder if any of them know each other at all. I feel like they all come from different departments. So
amazing. I
Did
just
you
hit
do-
random mix.
that's what I was going to ask. Yeah.
Worked well.
Yeah. Do you want to just go into the quote then, and then we'll wrap up and say, if you have questions, we'll stick around or throw them in the chat.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Cool.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Hopefully it was nice to have some thought partners from different departments than your own here. Joe and I were just reflecting upon how we're not sure how many of you knew each other before those breakout rooms, so hopefully that was beneficial. I want to end on a positive and optimistic note, as the author does in her book. She talks about the hope that she has as we move forward, and I imagine we can all share in this same hope. She says, "We will tell each other we hurt people and who. We will tell each other why and who hurt us and how. We will tell each other that what we will do to heal ourselves and heal the wounds in our wake. We will become accountable, rigorous in our accountability, all of us unlearning, all of us crawling towards dignity. We will learn to set and hold boundaries, communicate without manipulation, give and receive consent, ask for help, love our shadows without letting them rule our relationships. And remember, we are of earth, of miracle, of a whole, of a massive river. Love, life, life, love." Couldn't have said it more beautifully myself. Obviously, as we work towards a more just future, that's something that we need to keep in mind. We would like to give a special shout out to both Kelly Schaefer and Nicole Eggleston Watkins, because they both were influential in how we put together our presentation, since they have both led similar presentations for staff in the past. So wanted to give a special thank you to them before moving forward. And as we wrap up here, I'm going to place a form in the chat that I would love for you all to fill out. The book costs around $10, and we're trying to figure out a good way that we could potentially get you a copy if you would like one. So we have a spot in the form included there for you to indicate whether or not you'd like to read this book, and we will see what we can do to get your hands on a copy. But we would like for you to complete that form anyway, just to share a little bit about what your thoughts are of this presentation, so we can continue to improve in the future. I also did want to put on your radar that we have, excuse me, a leadership transition event coming up on Saturday, April 29th. That feels far away, but we will blink and it will be here. This is mainly for students who are leaders or wanting to become leaders in a student organization. And we will be asking for not only student hosts for sessions, but also advisor hosts for sessions, to help students learn more about the process of what it takes to take on a leadership role. How do you switch from one leadership role to another leadership role so that they can have a smooth and successful transition to make for a good start for the 2023-24 academic year. Wow. Lastly, a recording will be sent out tomorrow. We're going to put this up on our YouTube channel, and I will send that out via the listserv, and I will include the link on the survey form as well in that email, just in case you don't have quite enough time to fill it out right now. We will make sure it's still in your hands. I want to thank you so much for sticking around here for the hour. Hopefully you gained something new. I left Joe's contact information and my own contact information here. Should you need us for anything, we're always happy to help. We will stick around for a few minutes if you have questions for the group, if you have questions for us as individuals. You can also feel free to use the chat too. But again, I want to thank you so much for being here, and be on the lookout for more sessions to come as we continue to plan for the winter and spring quarters.